Okay, thank you very much for being here. Yeah, I'm Matteo, and I'm presenting something which is joined with Daniel Navarro Martinez from Pompeo Faba. I know it's almost the end of the conference, so what I have done is condensing the presentation in half a minute, and what we have done is essentially to conduct a lab field experiment to systematically test the links between a bunch of lab games to measure social preferences and a range of field behavior which are actually putting the subject in natural situation where they can actually behave prosocially. And essentially the bottom line is that actually we find a very weak evidence of correlation between the lab games and the field behavior. And that's it, essentially. Now, in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to elaborate a bit more, starting from the motivation. And the motivation is really that social preferences are quite at the core of behavioral and experimental economics. Games such as the Dictator and the Ultimatum, the Trust and the Public Good game are really central, and not only, actually have informed neighboring disciplines to economics in a variety of contexts. And it is fair to say that some of the most highly cited papers in experimental economics and behavioral economics are actually revolving around the social preferences. So it is somehow surprising that there is relatively little done on the external validity and to the extent to which social preferences games in the lab can actually capture real social behavior. And actually the issue of the external validity of social preferences lab games has actually animated a debate. For instance, this paper by Levitt and Lister has argued that there are at least 6 reasons why lab games, social preferences lab games have difficulties in being generalized in field settings. But our work is really motivated by the consideration that we would like to move away from a strategy which is only providing a one-to-one mapping between one specific lab game and one specific field behavior. Because most of the studies that we found are actually reporting a correlation between one specific lab game and one specific field behavior. And most of the literature that is quoted is actually providing, reporting significant correlation. For instance, in a very nice paper by Ensfer and Andreas Librand, there is actually a correlation, a significant correlation is found between the contribution in public good game and the size of fishnet mesh in among Brazilian fisher. When you actually look into a bit more detail into the literature, and you focus specifically on studies that report within the same studies evidence coming from the lab and the field for the same, exactly for the same subject, actually you get a quite a more nuanced evidence. In particular, you find a list of papers which are actually in different settings, which are actually relating specific games in the lab to specific prosocial behavior in the field, and then are finding significant correlation between the two. But also you find an equal number of studies that are actually finding no significant correlation, again considering one specific game in the lab and one specific behavior in the field. But most of the studies really are providing mixed evidence. Mixed evidence where actually the evidence is getting even more mixed once you are considering more than one game in the lab or than one field behavior. Okay, so and also actually the mixed evidence is also true for studies that are using a quite large number of subjects. Okay, So we wanted to have, we saw that the evidence kind of deserved a further investigation of the issue of external validity, and what we wanted to have it was a systematic approach. So rather than picking one specific game and one specific field behavior, we wanted to have to consider a systematic assessment between a broad range of lab games and a range of different field behavior. So we also considered a self-reported past prosocial behavior. Let me emphasize that the evidence that I just listed in the previous slide is only focused on studies that are providing lab field evidence within subject. Okay, so there is another literature which is not what we are actually discussing here, which are using a different approach and essentially considering one specific lab game and then across different type of experiments and subjects, spanning the continuous spectrum between the lab and the natural field experiments. For instance, the dictator game or the public good game, and then you look at different subjects in lab games, artifact field experiment, and natural field experiment. Is not what we do here. Right, as I said, what instead we are actually doing is considering a traditional lab experiment and then kind of building an extra lab natural field dimension in the following sense. Essentially, the same subject are actually coming into the lab 3 times in the same week, in 3 different days. On Monday, they are participating into a questionnaire with self-reported social behavior. On Wednesday, they are participating into a bunch of social preferences game. And then coming back to the same lab on Friday, they participate into a different lab context. And then once they go out of the lab, they encounter natural situations in the field where they can actually behave prosocially. Subjects are actually participant to the LSE Behavior Research Lab subject pool, and while we have within subject longitudinal dimension, we have a between subject randomization in a sense that the field situations that are actually the subject are encountering in outside of the lab, they actually have been randomized, randomly allocated across different subjects. All right, let me say something more in detail about the 3 different days. In day 1, the subject answer a questionnaire which is quite widely used in psychology, and is the self-report altruism measure, and essentially they self-report how often in the past they have done prosocial behavior, like giving money to a stranger or giving money to a charity or helping a stranger to carry belongings. Yes? Yes, please.
Do you have any concerns that asking about this prosocial behavior might influence their decisions on Wednesday?
This specific questionnaire was embedded into a much larger questionnaire that was including several other questions. And in the pilot, we tested whether they had an idea or whether one dimension of the questionnaire was about 1 hour questionnaire. And they didn't have any idea what was really the aim of the questionnaire. And actually, in the same questionnaire, we actually collected information about health-related information of socio-economic demographic. Yeah, it may be, but. Yeah, it is possible to experiment a different type of ordering within the same. Yeah, it's something that we are considering for a reason that I'm going to mention at the end. But it is possible that you can rerun. Yeah. In day 2, they went back to the experiment to the lab, and they participated into a set of 4 different one-shot games, the usual suspects, the Dictator, Ultimatum, Trust Game, Republic Good Game. All games were one shot. We use a complete absolute standard matching. There was no feedback between the different games, apart from the obvious feedback that you can get from an editor game. They were endowed by in all games with a £10 endowment, and then at the end of the session, one of the game was randomly selected, and then all subjects were actually paid according to the selected game, and all yeah.
So you had people play both sides of the ultimate game and both sides of the trust game?
No. Yeah, well, so they all subject they play the dictator game, then so then they keep in the role and they doing the sender or the responder in the ultimatum game and the trust game, and then they play a public good game.
I know that you're on the first one, several of the papers that you said before you too. Don't you think there is a lot of contamination between doing the whole games together?
There may be some contamination, but we try to sterilize as much as we can the contamination, in a sense not providing feedback, first of all, and then the game are all one shot. And on the other end, if we want to establish a kind of complete mapping between a range of game and a different range of field behavior, we cannot keep in uninvited the same person in the lab for a month. So in a sense, using one shot game and no feedback is ensuring that the contamination is kept as a minimum. But of course, there may be some cross-play, cross-game learning, for instance, or carryover effect. Yeah. So the order in which they play the game, actually that was piloted extensively. We kept, in this experiment that I'm showing you today, we kept the order as fixed, simply because the games were playing in an increasing order of complexity. So in the pilot suggested that it's much easier for a subject to get into a sequence of decision, starting from the simpler to the more complex one. But you can, of course, randomize the order or revert in the order and counterbalance it.
Aren't the opposite, that you want them to play the most complex game first, as they get tired?
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
They are more likely to make mistakes they did and stretch it out.
Yeah, well, I'm going to show you that some evidence that it doesn't matter much, in a sense, the order of the games which we play, because actually the gameplay is quite the gameplays of the subject are quite correlated across games, so there is a decent correlation. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that people often do, and you probably do it too, is you have one decision on a piece of paper, then you collect that, and then
Yeah.
there's some lag or something in between technique on the second one. Because what other people do is they have all of them on the same sheet of paper, and that's got to be bad.
Yeah. No.
So, I mean, you can only do so much,
Yeah.
you can't really practically one every other day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, those are ways of trying.
Yeah, and actually on this point, actually the subject were given instruction, then they played the game, then they had they were brought in a different they were quite separated the decision.
But unless you get some extremely high correlations between behavior in different games, I don't think this is a problem for your main finding.
Potentially, we probably do, but
I think we should continue right now.
Okay, hold on for a second. Yeah. Now,
What is the 5 pound?
Okay, so we sought to include a game where actually all subjects were responding and player 2 responded to the fixed amount of £5 to have a between subject comparison on players 2 plays in the Ultimatum and Trust game. And the fixed £5 was an offer made by the subject in the first session. Yeah, yeah. Okay, let me say what in day 3 they came. So the subject actually got paid for the social preferences game in day 2. They came back in day 3. They encountered a completely different lab task that was completely unrelated to social preferences, and then we paid them £30 for the participation into the 3 days. Using exactly the same bill and coin denomination for all the subject, including coins. And then we release the subject out of the lab every 3 minutes, one after the other. And in the field, outside of the lab, outside of the building lab, the subject encounter different natural situations where they can actually behave prosocially. Bear in mind that the lab in the at LSE is actually, thank you, yeah, is a building which is on Aldwych, which is one of the main streets in London, where it's quite busy. And coming outside of the lab, they encounter a stranger asking for help to carry some boxes, or asking to lend him the mobile phone because he had to make a call and he was out of credit. And then they encounter charities with the charity buckets collecting money for different charities, ActionAid, WWF, and actually was exactly outside of our lab, some of our research assistants collecting money for the behavioral research lab. Yeah.
Or is it possible that they would leave individually? Like my subjects always get to.
Yeah, they were released. No, they were released one after the other, and then we discarded a few observations where they were actually coming out they wait each other.
Physically make them leave the building?
Yeah, they stay at the lab, and then they were called by the experimenter and pay one by one, and then release and one by one. And then we had a research assistant outside of the building keeping track of the order. Yeah. Yeah.
In a week, and then they have to do different situations
Yeah.
in the lab, and also, but it didn't have anything about.
No, in what they actually encounter in the field. Yeah, yeah. They encounter, and they knew that they were participating into 3 sessions. They got £30.
They also knew that they can earn money.
And then they could have earn extra money in the session, but we didn't tell anything else about the nature of the effort. Okay, I guess I need to rush a bit. Okay, there is nothing which is particularly surprising in the lab games. We replicate the usual finding in the literature. And also, as I said, there is a decent correlation across the games, which suggests that something is, the social preferences game are picking up something on real social preferences attitude or subject in the lab. Also thanks to extensive piloting, we find that apart from the boxes manipulation, all the field manipulation were successful somehow to differentiate the behavior of people. In a sense, 1/3 of subjects didn't lend their mobile phones, and we have quite a lot of variability in the donation. Okay, now let me show this slide. So we are able to find one specific game in the lab, which is significantly correlated with one specific game in the field, replicating the results of some literature, but also, unfortunately, we have a 39 pairwise correlation that are actually not reaching statistical significance. And then, essentially, you can use explicit regression analysis and then try to predict the field behavior using the different plays in the lab. And actually, it doesn't matter how much you torture the data. Essentially, you don't find a statistical association between the lab games and the field behavior, prosocial field behavior that we're using as a manipulation. Actually, the lab games are also weakly correlated with the self-reported altruism in the past behavior. And concluding, we find very little evidence that social preferences games systematically predict field behavior and also past prosocial behavior. Arguably, ours is the most comprehensive systematic assessment of the links between social preferences games in the lab and prosocial behavior in the field, and raise caution on the external validity of lab games, prosocial lab games. And we, in the paper, we actually thinking that one of the reasons is simply that we follow in the literature what we implemented in the lab were a bunch of prosocial or social preference games that were stripped out of the context. They were completely neutral. Maybe it is the case that actually the context actually is informative in a sense. And that's it. Thank you very much. And here is one the working paper if you're interested. It depends on, it varies between 50 and 70. Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at a whole lot of different factors. I just wonder if you maybe have some single sample.
It may be that we have some, the field behavior, there were actually about 50, 70 people, but the results are not changing even if you're pooling, for instance, all the monetary donation together. Actually, the last column of the last table that I show is pooling all the information on monetary donation, and still they are not correlated with the social preference games in the lab. So, yeah, and you can probably do the same with the helping and situation. Yeah.
Did you find differential correlations between trust or trustworthiness and the type of tests? Because lending someone your cell phone is a bit more risky than helping someone carrying boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So, without seeing the data, I would expect that people who are more trusting are more likely
Yeah.
to lend someone their cell phone. Whereas trustworthiness or other type of purely altruistic behavior doesn't involve risk taking,
Yeah.
are more likely to be correlated with carrying boxes or
Yeah. Yeah, this is a good hint, and actually we didn't want to establish a one-to-one mapping between specific games and specific field behavior, but we also, I mean, it's possible to conjecture that some of the lab games actually have a stronger predictive power. We didn't spell out the hypothesis because we wanted to have a kind of agnostic take, but yeah. No, we also have the data on the first player.
But in the original paper, the
Yeah.
really significant correlation is trustworthiness.
Sorry, say again. Sorry.
I think in the original
Yeah.
paper, he only found correlation between trustworthiness
Yeah.
and loan payment, not the trust, not the first place.
All right. Yeah.
So I know you want to generalize,
Yeah.
but actually, are there, is the risk attitude involved at all in predicting the type of
Yeah, it may be, and actually we do have data on the other possible characteristics, risk preferences and time preferences, but we didn't explicitly want to draw one-to-one mapping between the social preferences game and the field behavior. Okay, I think probably need to, yeah.
Yeah, I think what might be coming at is, is it a fair approach, like,
You tell me, I don't know, but.
Yeah, yeah.